Hi, it's Terry Ryder from Hotspotting. If you've been following my broadcasts and my various writings, you'll know that I believe that the greatest source of misinformation about residential real estate markets across Australia is the Australian newspaper. No one else comes close in terms of articles that misrepresent what's going on in property around Australia. A couple of days ago, they had an article talking about the market in terms of auction clearance rates, and said that despite reports of a cooling in the nation's property market, the first point is we don't have a national property market. That's a mistake the Australian makes regularly. But what they said was, despite reports of a cooling in the national property market, auction clearance rates are remaining firm week on week. There's a couple of points I'd like to make about using auction clearance rates as a barometer for what's going on in the residential property market. Firstly, it's a very blunt instrument to be measuring the property market because the vast majority of properties don't sell at auction, even in the most auction-centric city in Australia, Melbourne. The second point is that of all the rubbery figures that are out there about real estate, and there's lots of them, the rubberiest figures of all, the most dodgy data of all, is auction clearance rates. They're an absolute rort. The system at which the research houses arrive at an auction clearance rates figures is reliant on the agents who conduct the auctions to report their results. And human nature being what it is, an agent who's had a successful auction and the property is sold under the hammer or soon after is more likely to report the result than someone who's had an abject failure and the property hasn't sold at all. So we have a system that's totally reliant on the energy and honesty of the auctioning agents in reporting the results. Now, there's been some independent research conducted on auction clearance rates. I myself have done that in years past, not so long ago. And what I found was that the true auction clearance rate is about 15 percentage points lower than the one that's actually published in media. Now, more recently, just late last year, one of the most respected research analysts in Australian residential property, Louis Christopher from SQM Research, conducted a similar exercise where he researched auction clearance rates to discover how accurate they were. And he came to the same conclusions, that the true auction clearance rates is something like 12 to 15 percentage points lower than the one that's published. And this is because many of the failed auctions aren't reported and aren't included in the figures. And if they are included, given that most of the unreported auction results are the ones that fail, drags down the actual clearance rate. So the true clearance rate, if media reports an auction clearance rate of 65%, the true clearance rate is something like 50%. And that's what we're seeing right now. The figures published in the Australian said nationally, last weekend, the auction clearance rate was 64.5%. Well, according to my research and according to Louis Christopher's research, the true auction clearance rate was about 50%, which means half of all properties presented for auction didn't sell. Now, in Melbourne, the clearance rate that was published reported 64%, in Sydney 65%, same result. What that tells me is that half of all properties now being presented at auction in our two major cities aren't selling. And therefore it's evidence, I think, that these markets are winding down and that they're well past their peaks and that particular party is well and truly over. Conversely, a couple of cities had much better auction clearance rates, if you can believe them. Canberra, almost 75%, Adelaide, 71%. But again, if you apply the same measure, the true auction clearance rate is more like 60% in Canberra and something a little bit lower in Adelaide. So it's something to be aware of, that media makes a big play about auction clearance rates and use it as often as the prime barometer of where property markets are. You need to be aware that what's published is a very, very dodgy data, a rubbery figure, and the true auction clearance rate is something like 12 to 15 percentage points lower, as proven by independent research, which I've done myself, so I know it to be true. Something to keep in mind. That's it for now. Terry Ryder from Hotspotting signing off. Talk to you again soon.